The fork clattered against my plate louder than I meant it to. Across the table, Mark's jaw tightened. Ethan sat between us, pushing peas around his plate, shoulders hunched like he was trying to disappear. The silence felt thick, suffocating. Mark had been quiet all through dinner, that dangerous kind of quiet where you know something's building. When Ethan finally stood to clear his plate, he forgot to say thank you. It was an honest mistake. He was 12 and exhausted from school. But Mark's face twisted into something cold. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and said it. Your son should be grateful I kept him. Most men wouldn't. The words hit like a slap. Ethan froze, his plate still in his hands. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Mark wasn't joking. His eyes were hard, almost satisfied, like he'd been waiting to say it. Ethan's face crumpled. He set the plate down carefully, turned, and walked straight to his room. I heard the door close. Not a slam. Just a quiet, defeated click. I sat there, staring at the man I thought I knew, and whispered to myself, how did we even get here? 2 years earlier, Mark was everything I thought I needed. I met him through work at a community fundraiser. He was funny, charming, the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and asked how your day went. After my divorce from David, I'd been alone for a year, terrified of letting anyone close to Ethan. But Mark seemed different. He didn't push. He was patient. On our third date he asked about Ethan. Not in that polite, obligatory way some men do. He genuinely wanted to know. He asked what Ethan liked, what made him laugh, what scared him. I remember thinking maybe this could work. Maybe we could be whole again. Mark started coming around more. He'd bring pizza on Fridays and watch movies with us. He bought Ethan a baseball glove and tossed the ball with him in the backyard. Ethan smiled more. For the first time since David left, it felt like we were breathing again. One night, after Ethan went to bed, Mark took my hand and said, "You don't have to be strong all the time anymore." Cried. I thought I'd found safety. I didn't know I was walking into something worse. Mark moved in slowly, like he belonged there all along. He started picking Ethan up from school, helping with homework at the kitchen table. Sunday mornings he'd make pancakes, and Ethan would sit on the counter, sneaking chocolate chips. Mark called him Buddy. Ethan called him Mark, but with warmth, like he was family. I watched them and felt something I hadn't felt in years. But then one afternoon, I overheard them in the garage. Ethan was showing Mark a drawing he'd made in art class. Mark chuckled and said, "You're lucky your mom found me, kid. Most guys wouldn't date a woman with baggage." He said it like a joke, light and casual. Ethan laughed nervously. I stood in the doorway, frozen. Baggage. That's what he called my son. I told myself I was overreacting, that it was just a throwaway comment. But something cold settled in my chest. I started watching Mark more carefully after that. The way he smiled when he said certain things. The way Ethan's laughter didn't always reach his eyes anymore. I didn't say anything. I should have. But I was afraid. Afraid of being alone again. Afraid of breaking what felt almost whole. David, my ex-husband, had been sick for a while. Cancer. He didn't tell Ethan how bad it was. He didn't want him to worry. But I knew. I visited him at the hospital one Thursday afternoon while Ethan was at school. David looked thinner. His skin pale against the white sheets. But his eyes were still kind. He smiled when I walked in. We talked about Ethan, his grades, his drawings. David asked how things were going with Mark. I lied and said fine. He didn't believe me. Could tell. Before I left, he held my hand and said, "Promise me something, Claire. Always protect Ethan's heart. No matter what." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. As I stood to leave, I noticed a sealed envelope on his nightstand. It was labeled in David's careful handwriting. For Ethan, to be opened only after my death. My stomach twisted. I wanted to ask about it, but the nurse came in and the moment passed. I left the hospital that day with a weight I couldn't name. David knew something. He was preparing for something. And I had no idea what was coming. Mark's mask started slipping in small ways. He'd call Ethan lazy if he forgot to make his bed. He'd sigh loudly when Ethan asked for help with homework. Once, at a dinner party with friends, Ethan spilled juice on the carpet. Mark smiled at our guests and said, "Kids, right? What can you do?" But the way he looked at Ethan wasn't kind. It was cold, disappointed. Ethan apologized 3 times, scrubbing at the stain with paper towels, his hands shaking. Later that night I heard Mark on the phone in the garage. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was taking out the trash. His voice drifted through the cracked door. "It's not easy raising another man's kid," he said. "He should be grateful." I stood there, trash bag in hand, feeling like the ground had opened beneath me. That phrase, "he should be grateful," it would come back later, sharper, crueler. But in that moment I just felt sick. I went back inside, checked on Ethan, and found him asleep with his light still on. I turned it off and whispered, "I'm sorry, baby." For what I didn't even know yet. David passed away on a Tuesday morning in October. Peaceful, the nurses said. Ethan didn't cry at first. He just stared at the floor, nodding when people hugged him. The funeral was small. Mark stood beside me, his hand on my shoulder, playing the role of supportive partner. People told me how lucky I was to have him. I smiled and said thank you. But David's brother, Uncle Tom, pulled me aside near the end. He glanced at Mark, then back at me. "Be careful with that one," he said quietly. David didn't trust him. I blinked. "What do you mean?" Tom hesitated, then said, "David updated his will 2 months ago." He didn't say much, but he made it clear he wanted Ethan protected. From everything. He squeezed my arm and walked away. I stood there, confused and suddenly afraid. Protected from what? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the sealed envelope. About David's warning. About the way Mark's voice had sounded on the phone. He should be grateful. I didn't know it yet, but David had seen what I was too afraid to admit. And he'd left us a way out. After David's funeral, Mark changed. It wasn't dramatic. It was a slow shift, like watching a door close inch by inch. He started managing our finances, insisting it would help me focus on grieving. He took over Ethan's school fund, saying he'd make sure it was invested properly. First, I was grateful. I was drowning in paperwork, in sadness, in trying to hold Ethan together. But then the comments started. "Ethan's too emotional," Mark said one night. David babbied him. "He needs to toughen up." When Ethan cried watching a movie about a dad and son, Mark rolled his eyes. "He's too soft," he muttered. One evening I was in the kitchen when I heard Mark in the living room. Ethan had asked him something about homework. Mark's voice was sharp. "I'm not your dad, Ethan. Stop expecting me to act like one. He's not my responsibility." Froze. The kitchen knife I'd been using slipped from my hand and clattered into the sink. When I walked into the living room, Ethan was gone. His bedroom door was closed. The light in his eyes, the one that had just started coming back after David's death, it dimmed that night. And I knew I'd failed him by not speaking up sooner. Ethan's grades started slipping. His teachers called concerned. He'd always been a good student, quiet but steady. Now he was distracted, withdrawn. One teacher said he seemed sad and blamed grief. I told myself it was normal. He'd lost his father. Of course he was struggling. But it wasn't just grief. It was Mark. The constant criticism. The belittling comments disguised as jokes. The way Mark made Ethan feel like he was in the way. One afternoon, Ethan came home early from school. I was upstairs folding laundry. I heard Mark's voice downstairs, sharp and mocking. "What is this? That's not art, Ethan. It's a pity project." I rushed down and found Ethan standing in the hallway, holding a drawing he'd made in art class. It was a picture of him and David at the park, detailed and careful. Mark stood in the doorway, arms crossed, smirking. Ethan looked at the drawing, then at Mark. Then, without a word, he tore it in half. He walked to his room and closed the door. I stood there, watching pieces of paper float to the floor, and felt something inside me crack. That drawing mattered. David mattered. And Mark had just destroyed both in 10 seconds. Mark started pressuring me about David's estate. He said we needed to finalize everything, that it wasn't healthy to leave things unresolved. He kept asking about the will, about what David left behind. I told him I didn't know all the details yet. The lawyer was still processing things. But Mark wouldn't let it go. One night he brought home papers. "Just sign these," he said casually. "It's to make sure Ethan's money is protected." I was tired, overwhelmed. I signed without reading carefully. A few days later, Ethan came to me holding an old shoebox. It was David's. Inside were letters, photos, and a small note. Ethan handed it to me. It was in David's handwriting, written just weeks before he died. It said, "Claire, trust your instincts. Not everyone who calls himself family is one. Protect Ethan. Protect yourself." The will explains everything. My hand shook. I looked at Ethan. His face was pale, serious. "Mom," he said quietly. "I think Dad knew something." I pulled him close and whispered, "I think you're right." That night, I locked the note in my drawer. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't trust him anymore. Not with this. Not with anything. I confronted Mark about the papers I'd signed. I asked him what they were really for. At first he was calm, dismissive. "It's just financial protection, Claire. You're overthinking." But I pushed. I told him I wanted to see everything before signing anything else. That's when his mask cracked. He exploded. Shouted that I was ungrateful, that he'd given up his freedom to help me raise another man's kid. He slammed his fist on the table and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. I stood there, shaking, heart pounding. Ethan appeared in the hallway, eyes wide. "Mom," he whispered. "He scares me now." I knelt down and held him. "He scares me too, baby." That night, I reread David's note. Trust your instincts. Not everyone who calls himself family is one. David hadn't been talking about money. He'd been talking about Mark. He'd seen something I'd been too afraid to see. And now, finally, I was ready to look. I called David's lawyer the next morning. I told him I needed to see the full will. Every word. Every clause. He said he'd schedule a meeting. "There's something you need to know, Claire," he said quietly. David made very specific arrangements. He was protecting Ethan from someone. "From who?" I asked. The lawyer paused. "I think you already know." Mark apologized 2 days later. He brought flowers, cooked dinner, apologized for losing his temper. He said he was just stressed, that he loved us, that he wanted to make things right. He suggested a family trip to the lake. Fresh start. I didn't trust him, but I was scared. Scared of what would happen if I pushed him away. Scared of being alone again. So I said yes. The trip was tense. Mark was overly cheerful, but his comments toward Ethan were sharp. When Ethan struggled to start the campfire, Mark muttered, "Guess your dad didn't teach you much." When Ethan caught a small fish, Mark laughed. "That's it. My nephew catches bigger ones with his eyes closed." Ethan stopped talking. He sat by the fire, quiet and small. That night, Mark raised his glass of soda and said, "To the family I chose to keep." His tone was light, but the words felt heavy. Poisonous. Ethan stared at the fire. I stared at Mark. And I realized in that moment, he didn't see us as family. He saw us as something he owned. Something he controlled. The trip ended early. I said Ethan wasn't feeling well. We drove home in silence. That night, I lay awake and made a decision. This had to end. I just didn't know how yet. My best friend Jenna came over the following weekend. She hadn't seen us in months. Mark had been subtly isolating me, always with an excuse why we couldn't visit friends or have people over. But that day he was out. Jenna took one look at me and frowned. "Claire, what's going on?" I tried to brush it off, but she wasn't buying it. She watched Ethan carefully. How he flinched when the door opened. How he apologized for everything, even things that weren't his fault. When Ethan went to his room, Jenna leaned in close. "Claire," she said quietly, "that man's not helping you heal. He's feeding on your guilt." I started crying. I couldn't help it. She held my hand and said, "You know what you need to do." He nodded. Did know. I'd known for a while. I was just scared. But Jenna's words stayed with me. Feeding on your guilt. That's exactly what Mark was doing. He'd seen a vulnerable woman and a grieving child and decided we were easy targets. David had seen it. Uncle Tom had seen it. Even Jenna, after one visit, had seen it. The only person who hadn't seen it was me. Because I didn't want to. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Not when Ethan was suffering. Not when every day felt like walking on glass. Ethan stopped speaking to Mark altogether. He'd nod when spoken to, but never started conversations. One night, Mark found a framed photo of David on Ethan's desk. It was handmade, decorated with drawings and stickers. Mark picked it up, looked at it and said, "You need to move on, kid." Then he threw it in the trash. I was in the hallway and heard the crash. I ran in and saw Ethan staring at the garbage can. His face blank. "Mark, what did you do?" shouted. He shrugged. "He's obsessed with a dead man. It's not healthy." I pulled the frame out of the trash, glass cracked, and handed it to Ethan. "Go to your room, baby." Ethan left. I turned to Mark. "Get out." He laughed. "You're not serious." "Get out." My voice was shaking, but I meant it. He grabbed his jacket, muttered, "I'm done playing daddy anyway," and walked out. Ethan heard. I know he did. Later that night I found a small backpack under his bed, packed with clothes and a flashlight. My heart broke. He'd been planning to leave. To run away from the man I'd brought into our home. I sat on his bed and held him while he cried. "I'm sorry, Mom. I just want Dad back." "I know, baby. I know." That night Ethan snuck out. I woke up at 2 a.m. and his bed was empty. Panic hit me hard. I grabbed my keys and drove to the only place I knew he'd go. The cemetery. I found him sitting by David's grave, knees pulled to his chest, crying. I sat down beside him on the cold grass and wrapped my arms around him. "I wish Dad was here," he sobbed. "He wouldn't let anyone talk to us like that." I held him tighter. "He might still be helping us, sweetheart. We just don't know how yet." Ethan looked up at me, confused. I told him about the letter, about the will, about how David had known something was wrong and left instructions to protect us. Ethan's eyes widened. "Dad knew about Mark." "I think so," I whispered. "And I think he left us a way out." We sat there for a long time, the two of us in the dark, holding on to each other and the memory of the man who'd loved us enough to keep protecting us even after he was gone. When we finally went home, something had shifted. We weren't running anymore. We were ready to fight back. We were back at that dinner table. The same one where Mark had said those poisonous words. But now I saw it all clearly. The manipulation. The cruelty disguised as care. The way he'd wormed his way into our lives and then held it over our heads. Ethan sat silently, barely touching his food. Mark was tense, annoyed that I hadn't apologized yet for kicking him out. He thought I'd crawl back. That I always did. When Ethan stood to clear his plate, forgetting to say thank you, Mark saw his opportunity. "Your son should be grateful I kept him. Most men wouldn't." This time I didn't freeze. I stood up. "Get out," I said, my voice steady. Mark blinked, caught off guard. "Excuse me. You heard me." "House." He laughed, but it was nervous. "You're being dramatic." "I'm being a mother," I said. "And you're done hurting my son." Ethan looked at me, eyes wide, hopeful. Mark stood, grabbed his jacket, and headed for the door. Before he left, he turned back and said, "You'll regret this. And so will your son." The door slammed. Ethan ran to me, and I held him. For the first time in months I felt like I could breathe. The war wasn't over. But we'd finally picked a side. The next few days were chaos. Mark called constantly, leaving voicemails that swung between apologetic and threatening. He showed up at the house twice. The first time I didn't answer the door. The second time I told him through the window that if he came back, I'd call the police. He left, but not before shouting, "I helped raise that kid. I have rights." The word made my blood run cold. That night, I received an email from a lawyer I'd never heard of. Mark was pursuing legal action. He claimed he'd been acting as Ethan's guardian and deserved partial custody rights. He also claimed he was entitled to access Ethan's inheritance because he'd contributed to his upbringing. I read the email 3 times, hands shaking. He was trying to take Ethan and David's money. I called David's lawyer immediately. His name was Mr. Brennan, and his voice was calm but serious. "Claire, David anticipated this. He left very specific instructions in his will. Instructions designed to protect Ethan from exactly this kind of situation." "What kind of instructions?" "Yes. Come to my office tomorrow," he said. "Bring Ethan. There's something he needs to see." I hung up and looked at Ethan, who was sitting on the couch, listening. "Tomorrow," I said. "We're going to hear what your dad wanted you to know." The lawyer's office was quiet, professional, intimidating. Ethan sat beside me, hands folded in his lap. Mr. Brennan pulled out a file and set it on the desk. "David came to see me 3 months before he passed," he began. He was very clear about his intentions. He wanted to make sure Ethan was protected, not just financially but emotionally. He was worried about Claire's situation at the time. I swallowed hard. He knew about Mark. Mr. Brennan nodded. He didn't trust him. He'd done some research, background checks, financial records. David wanted to make sure that if anyone ever tried to take advantage of Ethan, there were safeguards in place. He opened the file and pulled out a sealed envelope. The one I'd seen at the hospital. "This is for Ethan," he said. David wanted him to read it when the time was right. Ethan looked at me. He nodded. He reached for the envelope with trembling hands. Mr. Brennan added, "There's also a clause in the will. A very specific one." David made sure that any attempt by a non-parent to claim Ethan's inheritance would trigger an automatic legal audit. It would expose any falsified documents or coerced agreements. My breath caught. Mark signed documents. "I know," Mr. Brennan said grimly. "And the audit has already begun." Ethan opened the envelope slowly, carefully, like it might break. Inside was a letter, handwritten in David's familiar script. Ethan's eyes filled with tears before he even started reading. "Do you want me to read it?" asked gently. He shook his head. "No. I need to hear his voice." He cleared his throat and began reading aloud. "Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I'm not there anymore. I'm sorry, son. I wanted more time with you. But I need you to know something important. You are not a burden. You never were. You are my greatest gift. And I'm so proud of the person you're becoming." Ethan's voice cracked. I reached for his hand. He kept reading. "There may be people in your life who try to make you feel small. People who use words like grateful or lucky to make you think you owe them something. Don't. Real family doesn't keep score. Real love doesn't come with conditions." Tears ran down Ethan's face. He turned the page. "And to the man who tries to profit from my son's grief, know this. I saw you. I knew what you were. And I made sure you'd never succeed. May this truth free my family from your kind forever. With all my love, Dad." The room was silent. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat softly. "Your father loved you very much, Ethan." The audit moved fast. Within days, Mr. Brennan's office uncovered everything. Mark had forged my signature on multiple documents, attempting to list himself as Ethan's co-guardian. He tried to access David's estate funds under the guise of managing Ethan's future. He'd even opened a bank account in Ethan's name without my knowledge. Every lie, every manipulation, every attempt to control us was documented, timestamped, exposed. Mark's lawyer dropped him within 48 hours. His workplace launched an internal investigation after discovering he'd falsified records there too, claiming financial hardship to receive assistance while secretly trying to access Ethan's inheritance. One evening there was a frantic knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw Mark, disheveled, panicked. "Claire, please. Me explain. This is all a misunderstanding." I didn't open the door. Instead, Ethan appeared beside me. He looked through the peephole, then stepped back. "Mom, can I say something?" He nodded. Ethan leaned close to the door and said loud and clear, "My dad warned us about you." Silence. Then footsteps. Mark left and didn't come back. That night, Ethan slept through the night for the first time in months. No nightmares. No fear. Just peace. And I finally let myself cry, not from sadness but from relief. The legal case collapsed quickly after that. Mark couldn't fight an audit backed by David's ironclad will. The falsified documents, the coerced signatures, the attempts to manipulate Ethan's inheritance. It was all there, undeniable. Mark tried to claim he'd been acting in good faith, that he genuinely cared about Ethan. But Mr. Brennan presented evidence of Mark's prior relationships. 3 other single mothers. Similar patterns. Financial control. Emotional manipulation. He had a history, and David had uncovered it. The judge reviewed everything and made his ruling. Mark was barred from contacting us. His attempt to claim guardianship was dismissed with prejudice. And because of the falsified documents, he faced criminal charges. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted theft. I sat in the courtroom, Ethan beside me, and watched Mark's face as the judge read the verdict. He looked small. Defeated. Nothing like the confident man who'd once told my son he should be grateful. When it was over, Ethan squeezed my hand and whispered, "Dad really did protect us, didn't he?" "Yes, baby," I said. "He really did." We walked out of that courtroom together, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt like we were truly free. David's love had reached across death itself to save us. And it had worked. Life started to feel normal again. Ethan's grades improved. He joined the art club at school and started drawing again. Not sad pictures this time, but vibrant ones full of color and life. He made friends. He laughed. The light came back to his eyes. I started therapy, working through the guilt of not seeing Mark for what he was sooner. My therapist reminded me that manipulation is designed to be invisible. That I'd been vulnerable, grieving, doing my best. I was learning to forgive myself. One Saturday, Ethan asked if we could visit David's grave. We brought flowers and sat on the grass, the same spot where we'd sat that night he ran away. "I miss him," Ethan said quietly. "Me too," I said. "But I think he's still with us. In the ways that matter." Ethan nodded, then pulled something from his pocket. It was David's letter, folded carefully and laminated. He'd been carrying it with him everywhere. "I read it when I'm scared," he said. "It helps." I hugged him close. "Your dad would be so proud of you." "I know," Ethan said. And I could tell he really did. That confidence, that certainty, it was David's final gift. Not money, not a house, but the knowledge that he was loved, protected, and enough. A few weeks later, Mr. Brennan called. "Claire, there's one more thing. David left something else for Ethan. A recording." My heart skipped. "A recording?" "Yes. He made it 6 months before he passed. He wanted Ethan to have it when he was ready. I think now is the time." We went to the office that afternoon. Mr. Brennan handed us a small USB drive. David recorded this on his phone. He asked me to keep it safe until Ethan was old enough to understand. Ethan held the drive like it was made of glass. "Can we listen to it here?" he asked. Mr. Brennan nodded and set up his laptop. The recording started with static, then David's voice filled the room. Warm. Familiar. Live. "Hey buddy," David's voice said. If you're hearing this, it means I'm not there anymore. I wish I could be. I wish I could see you grow up, graduate, fall in love, all of it. But life doesn't always work that way. Ethan's eyes welled up. I held his hand. David continued. I need you to know something, Ethan. You were my greatest gift. Every single day with you was a blessing. And I need you to promise me something. Never let anyone make you feel like a burden. You're not. You never were. You're extraordinary, son. And I love you. Forever. The recording ended. Ethan was crying, but he was smiling too. I love you too, Dad, he whispered. That night, Ethan asked if he could listen to the recording again. We sat together on the couch and I played it 3 more times. Each time I watched Ethan's face. The way he closed his eyes and smiled when David called him, buddy. The way he nodded along like he was having a conversation with his dad across time. When it ended the final time, Ethan looked at me. Mom, I want to do something with Dad's letter. What's that, baby? I want to read it at school. For my English project. We're supposed to talk about someone who inspires us. My throat tightened. Are you sure? He nodded. I want people to know who he was. And what he did for us. The following week, Ethan stood in front of his class and read David's letter aloud. His teacher later told me there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Several kids came up to Ethan afterward and thanked him. One boy whose parents were divorced told Ethan, Your dad sounds like he really loved you. Ethan smiled. He did. And he still does. That night, Ethan framed David's letter and hung it on his bedroom wall, right next to the recording Mr. Brennan had given us, transcribed and printed. David's voice. David's words. David's love. Forever present. Forever protecting. Months passed. The legal battles were over. Mark was gone, facing consequences, and we were rebuilding. I got a promotion at work. Ethan made honor roll. We adopted a dog, a golden retriever Ethan named Buddy, after what David used to call him. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. One evening, as I was making dinner, Ethan came into the kitchen holding his phone. Mom, I wrote something. Can I read it to you? Of course. He cleared his throat. It's called The Man Who Saved Us. It's about Dad. He read a beautiful essay about David's love, about how even in death, his father had protected him, about the letter, the will, the recording, about how real love doesn't end, it transforms. When he finished, I was crying. That's beautiful, baby. I'm going to enter it in a writing contest, he said. I think Dad would like that. He would love that, I said. 2 months later, Ethan won first place. The prize was a scholarship for a summer writing camp. When the letter arrived, Ethan held it up and said, Dad's still taking care of us, isn't he? Yes, I said. He really is. And in that moment I realized something profound. Mark had tried to erase David, to replace him, to make us forget. But love doesn't erase. Endures. Fights. It wins. A year after everything ended, Ethan and I stood at David's grave on what would have been his birthday. We brought balloons, flowers, and a framed copy of Ethan's award-winning essay. I wish he could read this, Ethan said. I think he already has, I said. Ethan smiled and placed the frame against the headstone. Then he pulled out David's letter, the one he still carried everywhere, and read it aloud one more time. His voice was strong now. Steady. Confident. When he finished, he looked at me. Mark thought he kept us. But he was wrong, wasn't he? Yes, baby. He was very wrong. It was love that kept us, Ethan said. Dad's love. And ours, I added. We stood there together, mother and son, survivors and fighters, held together not by a man who tried to control us, but by a man who loved us enough to set us free. David's final words echoed in my mind. May this truth free my family from your kind forever. And it had. We were free. We were whole. We were home. As we walked back to the car, Ethan turned to me and said, Mom, I'm writing another essay. About you. I laughed. About me. Yeah. About the mom who fought back. Who believed Dad. Who saved us. I pulled him close. We saved each other, buddy. And as we drove home, the sun setting behind us, I knew that was the truest thing I'd ever said.